Hello, I'm Helen Snelson, and I want to challenge you that as women are 50% of the population, they should be 50% of your history lessons. So I'm going to help you with this by introducing you to Sylvia Dunn, whose face you can see on the screen. Sylvia is here in later life, which is really when she came to be better known. Until she was 65, as a gypsy woman, she travelled around the country. Once she was 65, she decided she was quite old for that. She bought 2 acres of land and settled down with 2 caravans and her older children. She also taught herself to read and to write. And she became quite extraordinary because Sylvia faced eviction, even though she bought the land and had rights to it. And she wasn't going to take that sitting down. So in 1994, she set up the National Association of Gypsy Women to stand up for the near 50,000 gypsy and traveller people who were being affected by unjust laws. By the time she was nearly 80, she stood for election against Michael Howard, the Conservative former leader, down in the Folkestone area of Kent. So hers was really quite a story. But what was she standing up against? She was standing up against planning laws, which meant that councils were no longer required to provide sites for gypsies and travellers. And yet at the same time, police were being given greater powers to move gypsies and travellers on from every other sort of land. The law still passed. There is a massive issue in this country with the planning laws and the impact they have on gypsies and travellers. But Sylvia carried on campaigning. She was determined to make it really hard for the law to be implemented because people were being made homeless and families were being broken down as a result. She talks in detail about how pregnant women suddenly found themselves unable to attend the same GP, how children in school suddenly were taken away from a school and made to move somewhere else. This was completely disrupting people's lifestyles, and the women were determined to fight about it. As Sylvia said herself, we are the ones left behind looking after the children and the trailers when the police turn up. We are used to confronting authority. She wanted to find a voice, and she found a voice for herself in Britain, but also much wider, as she engaged women in the World Romany Conference as well. And essentially, her struggle and the struggle of the other women that followed her was the defence of culture and family life. It's an example of women's solidarity, and that is a much bigger story, as well as the story that it reveals about the everyday prejudices that gypsies and travellers still experience in this country. But how could you use Sylvia's story in your classroom? Well, I think we can do a disservice to the women's history if we stop teaching women's history when women get the vote. Sylvia had the vote. She was still a woman who was being unjustly treated by law. Just because women have the vote is not the end of the story. So can you broaden the lens of your teaching of women to go much further into the 20th century, right to its end and beyond? Or perhaps you are already teaching about women and their struggle for rights after World War II. But women don't just fight for women's rights. Women's rights are humans' rights as well. And there is great, what we might call intersectionality. Sylvia was a woman. She was experiencing persecution and oppression as a woman. But it was because she was a gypsy, and also because she could see the impact on other gypsy people, including children. So don't just think of women in your teaching as women. Women have many identities. And Sylvia's story is one part of many attempts that people have made to make power accountable in Britain and to struggle for decency and equality. We might stand Sylvia alongside the people of Grenfell, alongside the people of Windrush. And in Britain, the fight for decency and equality is still ongoing. and still has much resonance.